Right. Thank you everyone for joining this webinar from the Industrial IoT 5G Insights service from RCR Wireless. The title of the webinar is Smartening Up the City, looking in particular at where smart cities have got to around the world. I'm David Pringle. I'm the host for today's webinar, and I'm going to give you a quick introduction, and then we're going to get into a number of presentations, and we're going to follow that by a Q&A. There will be a chance for you as the audience to ask questions, so please do input questions via the interface on your computers, and we will take those questions towards the end of the webinar. So the agenda today is should be on your screens now. We have myself, David Pringle. I'm the lead contributor here at the Industrial IoT 5G Insights service. Our first speaker will be Jeremy Greene. He's a principal analyst at Machina Research. Following Jeremy will be Svetlana Grant, Director of Future IoT Networks, the Connected Living Program at the GSMA. And finally, we have Rafael Cepeda. He's the Smart Cities Lead at InterDigital. So why are we talking about smart cities now? The concept of a smart city has been around for quite some time, maybe even decades, but it's been a long time coming. But there is still big potential to use the latest information and communication technologies to solve a lot of the problems facing municipalities around the world. Those problems today are exacerbated by the fast, rapid urbanization that's going on. There's a lot of people moving into cities around the world. That's causing a lot of congestion, overcrowding, pollution, etc. And there's a potential to use both connectivity and computing power to address many of these problems. But this has been attempted in the past, and progress has been somewhat slow. The reason for that is there's lots of different stakeholders involved. There's many different participants in any typical city, for both the local authority, the local government, but also the citizens themselves, the businesses, and the various different services that exist within a typical city. So the challenge is bringing that all together and actually harnessing these technologies in a way that is coherent and makes the best of them. But we may be at a key point in time in the development of the smart city. A number of new technology advances are coming together, and these are promising to make it much more economic, much more cost effective to actually create smart city solutions. A key one in particular may be low cost, low power, wide area networks, which will make it easier to deploy connectivity around a city, particularly an existing city, a so-called brownfield city that isn't being built from scratch. And there's also the prospect of 5G on the horizon, and all the good things that might bring in terms of connectivity. At the same time, the cost of sensors is falling, image processing is improving, and there's a lot of computing power being now available at a relatively low cost. So the question we're going to address in this webinar is, has the era of the smart city finally arrived? Now, following that introduction, I'm going to ask our first speaker to take over. He is Jeremy Greene from Machina Research. Jeremy, over to you.
Thank you, David. And I thought I'd just introduce who we were for a second. We're Machina Research. We're an analyst company, and we're specialized in IoT. And rather than introduce us, I thought I'd show you some slides with some of our the logos of some of our clients. It's the best and brightest from the IoT. So next slide, David. So as David has said, it does feel like we've been talking about smart cities for a very, very long time. But it's not entirely clear that we've been talking about the same thing for all that time. We started off probably about 10 years ago with the idea it seemed unproblematic, that there was all this fabulous ICT technology, and particularly M2M communications, which could help solve some of the problems in cities that seemed intractable. So we started off with this focus on point solutions aimed at specific problems. And then the realization dawned that there was a commonality between some of these solutions, and thus there was an opportunity to share resources and elements from those solutions, especially the network, but also in the back end, in databases, in analytics, in application frameworks and tools, and so on. And as time has passed, we've moved from that idea of just simply sharing resources to a recognition that there's a danger of getting locked into a particular vendor's solution. And thus we've moved again away from the idea of a single centralized platform that was one platform to rule them all. And we've increasingly, there's a focus on standards and open interfaces and interoperability via APIs, rather than this sort of single centralized city brain. Next slide. And at the same time that journey's been ongoing, there's been another one in parallel, where we've changed what we mean by smartness. So in the early years, there was a big focus on municipal operations, the operations of the city's internal systems, and the vision was something like the mayor on the bridge of this sort of Starship Enterprise-like thing, controlling all the city's systems. And we've moved away from that now and towards an increasing focus on the citizens. So it's much more, it's about engagement and participation. And with smartness is now much more seen as a two-way street. So there's a different flavors of the discussions, with a lot more emphasis on the user interface and on opening up data so that the data can, one lot of data can interact with another lot of data, but also about presentation layers. And it also means that there's been a bigger focus on things that citizens care about, rather than necessarily the things that make the biggest impact in the city. So the poster child for this, if you like, is Fix My Street, where you can send a message to your municipality that says there's a pothole. But it's noticeable that some commentators are starting to include other sharing economy things in their definition of the smart city, even when they're nothing to do with the municipality, or even service economy platforms. Like you see Uber increasingly cited as being part of a smart city. Next slide. One thing that analysts like to say a lot is that there's no one size fits all, but it's really true of cities. If you think about different kinds of cities, I would consider London, which has either 8 million or 13 million, depending on where you draw the boundaries and where you count it, and Cologne, which has 1 million. Projects that you can think about doing in Cologne are a lot more complicated if you intend to do them in London. Another important difference is that the political frameworks for all these cities are very different. Living in London, it's easy to think that the London mayor is a celebrity and is an important politician, but actually the mayor of London is not responsible for very much at all. So if you imagine him on his Starship Enterprise bridge, he just doesn't have very many levers to pull, compared to, say, the mayor of a much smaller French city. A French mayor controls the city's water and the sewerage and its police force and its buses. The British mayor doesn't control any of those things, and even those things that they normally control has probably been outsourced to a private company with a long-term contract. So you have not much political control, and you have fragmentation. And then the problems that the cities face are all different. So there's huge variations in, for example, the traffic congestion between, say, Cologne again, and London and Lagos. The efficiency of the public transport, the level of air pollution. There's a big difference between an old city with an out-of-date infrastructure again, say like London, and a city that never had much infrastructure or has grown much faster than that its infrastructure has grown. That's typical of developing country type cities. Hold on one second. And it's important to remember that not every city, we typically talk about the problems of success, that of cities outgrowing their infrastructure, but not all the problems are about success. We have cities that have either failed or are failing. So we have fragile cities. Some people talk about feral cities, and there's a network of shrinking cities. And in all those places, there isn't a city budget that might possibly be on the same scale as the problems that the cities have. There's a very uneven vulnerability to climate change, and so on and so on. So next slide, David. The other thing that's worth bearing in mind is that cities are they're like and they're not like enterprises. From the supply side, we often tend to think, well, it's a large organization. Cities must be quite a lot like enterprises. And in some ways they are. They have legacy IT and communications. They've got organizational structures with silos. They've got budgets, and they've got purchasing centers. But they're different too. I mean, the major and most important difference is that they have goals and objectives other than financial, which by and large a commercial enterprise doesn't have. So some of those are imposed through regulations and administrative obligations, what we call statutory duties. We often talk about city managers as if they're some sort of CEO, but in a city, power is shared and it's diffused, and crucially, it involves elected politicians. And elected politicians have different considerations to commercial CEOs. So, of course, we know that companies care about their image, but sometimes it's surprising how far a politician thinks they can go towards meeting their obligations, or their objectives, by just posing in front of something and having a picture taken. And it's worth remembering that the municipality is not the same as the city. At one level, the municipality has responsibilities that extend over the space that's occupied by the city limits, but often the city's economic influence extends way beyond its formal boundaries, and at the same time it doesn't control everything within those boundaries. It doesn't control its carbon footprint. It has limited impact on the air quality in the city. So my last slide, David. So we're in an experimental phase, but it's not experiments in the sense that they constitute a coherent program of science. We are in a phase where we have a lot of pilots, and yet those pilots don't seem to build into much consolidated learning. So you see this, many cities will repeat pilots that have been tried somewhere else. It often seems to be the case that those pilots don't get documented, so nobody gets the opportunity to learn from somebody else's pilot. There aren't many what you'd think of as exemplary implementations. There aren't many places where people can point to and say, you want to do smart street lighting, go to Freiburg or Stuttgart or whatever, and they've done it right, just do what they've done, or smart parking or anything like that. And I think that's partly because we have tended to emphasize competition between cities rather than learning between cities. So the last little picture there is the man who is at least partly responsible for that. That's a man called Richard Florida, who wrote a book called The Rise of the Creative Class, which very much emphasizes that cities compete to attract these cool and funky people who in turn lead to economic growth. I think it's from a supply side, we've been very prone to, if you think of a city like an enterprise, you say, hey, do this, you can get one step ahead of your rivals and your competitors. So we've brought the same approach to cities, and perhaps we've done that a little bit too much. So that's what I wanted to say, and now I'm very happy to hand over to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. So Jeremy's set the scene there. We're now going to move to Svetlana Grant of the GSMA, who's going to give us look a little bit more at some of the enabling technologies. Svetlana, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, David. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I would like to talk to you a little bit about the use of mobile technologies for the smart cities and the Internet of Things. And if we go to the next slide, David, I would like to, first of all, for those of you who do not know who the GSMA are, we are a trade association for the mobile industry with about 800 mobile operators globally as our members and nearly 300 companies of various infrastructure, device and application providers. And we have viewed the smart cities as one piece of a big Internet of Things puzzles. There is obviously more to it to just IoT. There are connected people, there are connected citizens, and there are quite a lot of different angles that we can use to look at the smart cities. We started looking at smart cities about 5 years ago and have had projects related to smart cities all this time. And now we are dealing with yet another bit of enabling smart cities, which concerns connectivity. And the reason why we do it is because it is a growing area, and there was already a reference to the declining cost of chipsets, to the pervasive connectivity, to the growing number of projects, to the availability of IPv6 addresses, and generally there is more and more proof coming in that there are plenty of benefits to deploying the connected solutions for the cities. We've done a number of research projects with the likes of PwC and Accenture, which looked at the potential benefits captured from introducing the smartness and the intelligence to the cities. And the benefits range from some of the efficiency gains, such as the example quoted here in traffic telematics, where reclaiming nearly 2 hours every week in China, for example, would add over $20 billion US to the Chinese GDP every year. And because smart cities are such a huge area, we are looking at efficiency gains from the smart grid, smart metering types of solutions. We're looking at big savings from the healthcare costs, and mobile industry has a fairly significant place to play. Just looking at some of the predictions in the total number of machine-to-machine connections by 2020, there is some expectation that a fifth of these could be coming from the cellular machine-to-machine and low-power wide area solutions. And of course, as with any new growing and emerging industry, even if it takes a while for it to emerge, there are plenty of risks that need to be addressed and preempted, and there are plenty of issues that need to be resolved. So security is certainly one of those that we are working on to guide the new companies, the IoT companies, to understand the basic principles that they need to follow to provide security for the IoT services and applications. And we are looking at further ways of how to make it easier to get connected and to gather and share intelligence with the cities. So in the next slide, David, I'd like to talk to you about the low power wide area solutions that are standardized in 3GPP and will be released at the end of June. So we're talking about 3 technologies here that are based on the existing mobile network footprint. So we're looking at the LTE network-based LTE MTC, LTE machine type of communication technology, also known as Cat-M1. We're looking at the narrowband IoT technology, which is built specifically to send very small amounts of data at very big distances, and allowing the battery in those connected devices to last for as long as 10 years plus. We're looking at a GSMA IoT type of technologies, which are going to be using the existing 2G network footprints. And so all of this can be deployed very quickly over the existing coverage of mobile networks and beyond, because all of them provide extended coverage. We are looking at very low costs, so they are going below the existing 2G modules, for example. We're looking at very long battery life, again, depending on how much traffic is going to be sent. It's going to be years, and in many cases, for such applications as water metering, it can last as long as 15 years. And we're looking at the way to not only read the data from these devices with this 3GPP technologies, but also to communicate to devices, which is not something that is sometimes thought of by the organizations and companies deploying IoT solutions. Very often they find out that when they deploy the solution, they only need to read the data from a sensor or device, but as the time goes by, they come up with different ideas for applications and services, and they understand that it's a good idea to send security patches, for example, to their devices, and also to upgrade firmware as need be, and maybe introduce some new services. So all of those features of the new technologies are available, and of course, as these are standards based and will will be deployed over the existing mobile footprint, it will effectively provide global coverage and make them quickly scalable. And there are plenty of examples in the existing smart cities where mobile operators are involved. Just making a quick list, it's anywhere from the US, where there is a big initiative to connect smart cities, to China, where plenty of smart cities initiatives are going on with such solutions as smart parking and a range of others, smart grid, for example, where mobile operators are already involved, to plenty of European cities, from Santander and Barcelona to Amsterdam and German cities, where mobile technologies are used as sort of the total big range of heterogeneous technologies that include a lot of short range, a lot of fixed networks. So mobile fits in very well to support a very big range of use cases. And if we take a look at the next slide, one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is some of the trials that are currently taking place for low power wide area technologies in licensed spectrum, so the 3GPP standardized technologies. Just some of those I wanted to mention to you involve water monitoring and environmental monitoring. For example, the Chattahoochee River Keeper example in the US, where mobile is used as part of the solution around Atlanta area. Very interesting example where a completely different approach to water monitoring has been taken by using some of the power saving features and low power technologies. We're looking at quite a few examples of smart parking applications, and these have now been trialed with the cities in range of cities from the Middle East to Germany to China. We're looking at some of the examples that are coming in terms of waste management in Vodafone in Australia, and some of this have already been deployed over the old 2G, for example, technologies, and now they are moving to more optimized solutions that will work better for the cities. Generally, this year we will see a lot more customer trials and pilots taking place with the cities, and next year, from the first half of 2017, a lot of commercial launches will be taking place. And so within the GSMA, if we take a look at the next slide, we run the Mobile IoT Initiative, and we also run a Smart City project. So we work jointly in collaborating with the cities and explaining to the cities what type of solutions are available for them. And of course, today I'm talking about connectivity, but there are quite a few other services, from platform-based services to open APIs to analytics services and security services that can be provided on the existing interoperable platforms. So we are supporting not only the new low power wide area solutions, but also discussing other features of the mobile technologies that that are effectively used in the cities. And if we look at the next slide, in terms of the operators and vendors who are currently involved, I've got a list of those who are already actively working on the deployment and development of low power wide area solutions. And we have a lot of companies joining every day, and also asking for collaborative projects. So we expect to see a lot more activities in the smart cities area as the months go by, and certainly commercial launches next year. So that's the main presentation that I wanted to leave with you. And if we go to the next slide and the next slide, you will see a number of references for the content on the GSMA site, where you can find out more references for some of these solutions. So thank you very much, and I'll hand over to the next speaker.
Okay, thank you, Svetlana. We'll talk a little bit more about some of those enabling technologies later on in the Q&A. So thank you for that. Our next speaker is Rafael Cepeda from InterDigital, who's going to give us his take on particularly on what's happening, I think, in the UK. So Rafael, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, David. So we've been hearing about smart cities. So my purpose with this very short presentation is to share what we're doing in the UK and what we think is the next step after smart cities. So with this practical example that we called One Transport, we want to show how the smart city concept can be taken into a more multi-geographical, multi-system and multimodal integration system, where multiple sector partners can join forces to create solutions that are more targeted to what cities need and also to what different partners in this ecosystem need. So in the next slide, what we see is the main, let's say, the main reason why we thought about this project is smart cities are evolving into a world of silos. And if we see the next slide, we see that if you look at different smart city concepts, you see that they are kind of growing in isolation in different geographies. So city A is a competitor from city B, as one of the previous speakers mentioned. Also, there are many bespoke and incompatible solutions that can be very good, but unfortunately they are not transferable or expandable to other cities or to the region where the city is actually deploying these solutions. So we see multiple different technologies, mostly incompatible, and what this is producing is log data. So data is useful only for a city, but maybe it's not useful for other cities. And this is also sometimes driven by who is the provider for the particular technology in that city. So what we see in the next slide is what an IoT solution needs to be actually the best possible solution for a city. So first, the platform and the city, the sensors, all the deployment needs to be economically sustainable. And I'm not talking about just the initial deployment. I'm talking about what happens after 3 years, 4 years, 10 years. Solutions have to be sustainable in that sense. Solutions also need to integrate whatever is already deployed in cities. So that's what I mean with legacy systems. And this should play an important role on how you integrate future sensors and new systems. And once you start integrating whatever is already deployed in cities with new developments, then you create an open marketplace for data and data services for the benefits of the inhabitants in the city and also the region and the country and probably the world if you can interconnect multiple cities globally. Also, something very important for cities is to have a better control of information. It's not only about open data that sometimes is misled as free data, is who is accessing your data, under what conditions, what can they do with the data. So cities need to understand better what their data assets are and how these are being used, and how people are actually benefiting from this data. Also very important for cities is to understand or to have an acknowledgement of what data they're producing, how this data is actually helping the city to grow, and feedback from users. And feedback from users is not great, I like your platform. It's more about I'm using a mobile app based on the data from the city, and how my journey, my experience is producing more data that will help cities to do a more informed planning of the evolution and the growth of the city. And it's also once you have an open marketplace for data and data services, you may have multiple competitive and web apps that will create solutions that target specific sectors of the population. And this is not only about mobile applications or web applications, but it's also a wealth of different analytics that may not come just from one company or one institution, but for many in a very competitive marketplace. And so the last point is that it is important to start thinking about integration among multiple cities. It's not anymore about only one smart city concept. We need to start thinking about how cities integrate with regions, and how cities integrate with more cities, and how you or me, for example, as a user, can move from city to city using the same mobile applications or using the same tools that make me feel at home in other cities. So in the next slide, what I want to show is just a brief summary of the project we are running in the UK. So this project is it's a cooperation of 11 multi-sector partners. As part of this project, we have 4 local authorities and Highways England. These guys are actually leading a transport data initiative where they share understanding and knowledge of how data is used, how data can be consumed with multiple local authorities. So it's an open forum for discussion. We have analytic providers, so it's Imperial College and Track, bringing different sets of analytics. We're integrating more than 200 different data sets from local authorities and Highways England. And we are also integrating different sensors from Clearview and World Sensing with the aim of showing that we are integrating whatever is already in cities with new sensor deployments. We also have a transport expert, Arab, which is leading the research and innovation on how better transport systems can be deployed. This project is sponsored by Innovate UK. It's a governmental institution in the UK. And we started on the 1st of November, and we are open to more partners to join in, to explore the data sets we have, and also to join the local authorities and have some sharing of knowledge and understanding. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rafael. That's a good insight into what's going on in the UK and in transport in particular. So now we're moving to the Q&A section of the webinar. We're going to take some questions from the audience and deal with some broad topics as well for the panelists. I want to start with the technology side of things, and maybe if I start with you on this, Jeremy, and then come to Rafael, and then maybe we can dig a little bit more into the mobile networks with Svetlana. Jeremy, I think the first question for you is all the technology we need now available? Are there any pieces missing, or do you think we now have all the technology we need and at the price points we need?
Oh, those are 2 different questions. I am unmuted, aren't I?
You are, yes, I can hear you. Yep.
Yeah, oh, good. Okay, those are 2 different questions. The first thing is, there will be technologies which will come along later, which will turn out to be useful that we haven't thought of at the moment. But I don't think there is any yawning gap. There isn't some roadblock that is preventing city-type applications from being deployed. We've got a number of different connectivity technologies now that sort of cover the waterfront. We've got sensors of various kinds. We've got all the back-end stuff. You know, it isn't the case that they can't get better, and they could. There will be performance tweaks that will make some applications which can't be done or can't be done economically at the moment. That you know, the things. But as to your second point about the price points, you know, as things get cheaper, the range of contexts in which these things can get deployed will get wider. So whatever, you know, wherever you deploy these things, you need something like a business case, and that business case gets easier as either the connectivity or the modules or the sensors or the cost of supporting those gets cheaper. So the second part of the question is about the price point is a little more of a movable feast. But in answer to the first one, I don't think there's a yawning technology gap anywhere. But I'd be interested to hear what the other two panelists think.
Svetlana here. If I can add to that, I would agree that we are not looking at a massive technology gap at this time. I think we needed to have the low power solutions to address the long battery requirement, and generally the requirement for this sensors and devices to be located, you know, either deep indoors or further out in the field, and so this has now been done, and I think that you know, these new technologies now address quite a range of different very extreme cases, and I think that you know, we'll probably see more in terms of new technologies when 5G becomes available, but you know, we are not looking at this in the short term, so there'll obviously be more availability. But at this point in time, I think it's more about the way you use these technologies and how you know, build the solutions to justify your business case. That's more important. I think the cost level is now low enough to enable it. So it's more about a partnership to make these solutions viable rather than try to find another technology.
Yeah, thank you, Sven. And thank you, Jeremy. There's a couple of questions here related to that from the audience around how do you choose which connectivity solution to use. There's a lot of potential ways to connect smart city solutions and sensors and monitors, etc. How do you actually choose which solution, and also how do you handle the signaling side of the equation? Svetlana, I'll put that to you, but if Raphael or Jeremy wants to chip in as well, please do.
Yeah, and I've just replied via text as well to this question. So, so in the new 3GPP technologies, the signaling is hugely reduced. It's simplified. It's existing solutions, but they're simplified, and a lot of time the devices that are out there are either in sleep mode or in idle mode. They come online and communicate and chirp, you know, occasionally, and then the rest of the time they don't generate any new traffic, and that's one reason why these technologies have been sort of upgraded to low power wide areas to deal with the signaling, which then affects the battery life and allows the devices to keep going a lot longer in terms of months and years rather than days.
Yeah, I'd like to, is Raphael Spev here. I'd like to add to this and also to link somehow this question with the previous question. So I think there's a lot of wealth of technology available now for smart cities. I think it was also mentioned that the cost of sensors is falling. The main problem that I see now, once we start deploying this in multiple cities, is that the cost of sensors is lowering, but the cost of integration is rising. And the reason for this is that there are many different vendors with different solutions, sometimes proprietary. And then when you start integrating these sensors in different platforms, that becomes really costly. And so there are some emerging standards like 1M, 2M that try to harmonize how devices are connected to a single platform. But what will happen in the future is that we will have multiple of these platforms, and there is a need to start integrating multiple platforms and to make data available across multiple of these solutions. And I think that that's the next step.
Yeah. Okay. And actually, on that question, there's another audience question around standardization. Actually, and Svetlana, this is around the emergence of LoRa, and whether that's a competitive or complementary system to what mobile operators are doing around the mobile IoT initiative that you mentioned. If you could briefly just touch on that and the issues around standardization that Rafael touched on there.
Yeah, thank you, David. And the answer is both. A number of the GSMA operators are deploying LoRa, and obviously, for those of you who know, LoRa is a proprietary technology that is offered in unlicensed spectrum, so ISM spectrum. So there are deployments out there in the market, and we expect that a lot of operators who are looking at LoRa will also be deploying over their existing network footprint as well. So it could be instead, it could be together. There are really all sorts of options. The point is that, if a city works with kind of a range of operators who are active in that particular market, there is a technology for whatever need is there. So I think it's just a matter of talking to your supplier and finding out what's available, what kind of coverage is already there, what price points you're looking at, and kind of figuring out what works for you best.
Okay.
It's not, the point is not to say there is one single technology. The point is that there is a lot of choice, and I think it's probably a matter of figuring out what each of these can do and how it can work best for you.
Yeah. Okay. Jeremy, I just a related question I'd like to put to you actually is whether cities should wait for technologies to be standardized. In the case of some of these technologies, the standardization process is still ongoing. And, what's the risk of deploying a technology that might become obsolete in a few years' time? What are your thoughts on that?
I saw the question in text as well. On the one hand, there will be vendors who will turn up and tell you that you need to be first off the block with these things. You need to steal a march on your rivals and gain competitive advantage for your city. And I think you can safely discount all of that. But if you wait for perfection, you'll never deploy anything at all. And the key really is not to assume that that every part of your solution is going to last forever. You need to think about which are the bits that are really difficult to change and which therefore need to be relatively mature, and which are the bits which you can swap over for something else relatively simply. If you think, by analogy, if you think about yourself as a mobile phone user, you buy a mobile phone and you keep it for maybe a year or maybe 2 years if you're a laggard like me, and then you change it for another one. It doesn't matter that the mobile network is going to upgrade its technology every few years. You don't say, well, I'm not going to buy a 3G phone because one day there's going to be 4G. The key thing is to think about which bits of your solution are going to be really hard to touch and not to stick something in there that's likely to become obsolete versus which bits can be reconfigured, or if some sort of translation or interface layer between them can be reconfigured so that you can add what you've done you could make it talk to whatever you're going to replace it with. I hope that doesn't sound too abstract, but in a way it is about abstraction layers.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point about waiting for perfection is an important one, and you could always hold off making a purchase decision. I guess it's a question of when you take the plunge. Just in the interest of time, we're just going to switch topics now to there's been a question asked around privacy and personal data, which I think Rafa is addressing by text, but let's hear the answer live as well, Rafa. In terms of there is obviously a lot of potentially sensitive data being captured by smart city solutions. How do we, assuage those concerns, and how do we ensure that residents, citizens are protected with appropriate safeguards?
Yeah, I can add on that. So in the same way that that cities need to be more aware of how their data is being used, is the same applies to people in cities. They need to become aware of what their data is being used for, and at the same time they need to add value to the data they produce. So it's not anymore about getting raw and unprocessed data from users. It's telling users, okay, we will use your data, enhance it, add metadata, add information about what you're doing, and in that way data owners or end users will become more like data producers where they have more control, and they provide even better information for cities and to multiple players that can actually pay or exchange services in exchange of data.
Okay, Jeremy, any quick thoughts on that? I think we've discussed that issue in the past.
Yeah, I mean, only to say that I think actually to some extent, actually, people are quite grown up about these things. And on the one hand, there are people that are there are occasions in which people don't think very much about their data privacy, and they expose things that perhaps they ought not to expose and that don't make them safe. But on the other hand, if you can explain to people that there is a social or a community benefit, they're often quite happy to share either data or information or processing power in the knowledge that other people who are not them are going to benefit, but they'll benefit from somebody else doing the same thing. I think where people become unhappy is when they are contributing their data, which then becomes part of somebody else's commercial service, so they get monetized. But the municipalities, in a way, are in a strong position because they represent a public body. If you say that, if you you can say to citizens that you sharing your information, whether it's about your travel or the sensor data from accelerometers or from air pollution sensors, or if you're prepared to share that, then there'll be a benefit for you. I think cities are in a better position to do that than some commercial organizations.
Okay. Sorry, again, going to have to change topics, just addressing the audience questions. There's a couple of questions around sensors and how they'll be used. One's around the use of sensors at street intersections. Rafael, I'm thinking you've looked at the transport use cases in particular. Any thoughts on how sensors can be applied and whether they perhaps should be single point solutions or whether you'd have a multi-purpose sensors at street intersections?
So for street intersections, you can have many different sensors looking at different things, and even sometimes have some redundancy to ensure that you know what's going on. For example, you can have road loops that are under the tarmac, and those will count the number of cars, but also you may need to understand better how traffic is flowing. So you use cameras, and this will provide automatic number plate recognition systems. So it's really a mix of different sensors that need to be deployed. And in that respect, you will need different connectivity methods. So cellular is one option, but there will be more proprietary and open solutions for connectivity. The main point here is how you are sending this data to, for example, cloud services, and how these cloud services interact with other cloud services.
Yeah, and there's a related question around whether these sensors need to have an IP capability, or whether they can connect to a sort of higher level device that aggregates the data and relays it back via the network. Svetlana, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I don't. Yeah, I don't think every sensor needs IP capability. I certainly think that there will be plenty of architectures there that connect sensors to a gateway of some sort, and the 3GPP technologies also support non-IP communication. So there are different ways to set this up depending on what works. At the moment, I think the cost of connectivity and the cost of connecting sensors to IP is going down so significantly that it's not difficult to envision connecting all of them via IP, but I don't think that's going to be the case.
Yeah, okay. Now, I know, Svetlana, you've taken this one via text, but I just want to cover this ground because I think it is important. There's a question about how much infrastructure the cities themselves need to own, and whether it's important that they actually own the assets, or whether they can use the existing public assets. So maybe if I can start with Jeremy on that, is it important for the city to have their own dedicated solutions with their own dedicated bandwidth?
Basically not. I'm sure Svetlana will answer this better than I will, but we didn't get where we are today by everybody building parallel networks on top of each other, so that the city's got a network, and then large enterprises all have their own networks. We have some really good technologies which make sense when they're deployed as public network technologies with shared access to them, and the idea that you've got to own and control all of it is basically not sensible. There are exceptions. There are places where you can do that, but by and large, that's not the way you want to go.
Just a quick thought from you, Svetlana, because there are some mission critical applications, I guess, where you need some kind of quality of service around that. You need to be sure that you'll get the connectivity when you need it. So is there a way that we can do that within the public networks?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a very, there are different ways you can use the public network, and certainly there are ways to work with the operators and have the SLAs written so that they support a lot of mission critical applications. Not all of them, obviously, which is why my answer was going to be really both. And you need to look at options, but generally I think it's a kind of Capex versus Capex and opex discussion. If you decide to run your own network, it doesn't mean that you've invested into it and you can let it be. You basically still need to have a team of people who run it, who maintain it, who upgrade it, who are aware of security implications, who need to basically look after it. Or you buy a managed service and you basically allow somebody else to do it. And I think that even for mission critical applications, there is a way to reuse the existing public networks with guarantees. So that's kind of very top level. I know it's very individual and depends on the application, but that's sort of top level answer. Yeah.
Okay, no, thank you for that. Well, just a quick concluding question. Just get your thoughts on who's going to actually make money from smart cities, in terms of what elements of the value chain will play a key role in delivering smart cities and realize the value there. I'm just going to ask you each quickly for your thoughts on that. I mean, I think we've had a sense of this. There is momentum in this market, but the value chain potentially could be somewhat complex. Maybe I can start with you on that, Jeremy. Who do you see making money from smart cities?
Well, I mean, everybody will make some money, but I suspect that most money will go to systems integrators.
Okay, Rafa?
I agree completely. It's going to be an ecosystem with money for multiple partners, but systems integrators will get most of it. Okay,
and Svetlana, I'm hoping you might give us a different answer, but we'll see.
Yeah, no, I'd love to give a you know, a completely different answer. But if you look at the kind of pyramid of value that will be created, you know, connectivity will obviously be generating some revenue. Otherwise, you know, the network providers wouldn't be building this networks. But generally, most of the value sits on top of it, and so systems integration, application support, platform types of services, those are all going to be much bigger bits of the pie.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Well, we're nearing the end of our time. I'm just going to wrap up quickly, actually, just to give a few high-level thoughts on what I've heard. I mean, as I said, we are, I think, hearing that the momentum around smart cities is growing, but I think Jeremy made a very important point about actually learning from the pilots and trials that are taking place out there. There may be quite a lot of duplication and repetition of trials going on, and there may be room to streamline that and move more quickly to commercial deployments. But certainly from what we're hearing, I think the technological pieces are in place, and it's probably now a question of picking the low-hanging fruit, the killer apps, as it were, that is going to get politicians and citizens engaged and get the smart city market really moving. But it does feel to me, from what we've heard, that we are reaching a key point in the development of this market. So I'd like to thank all our panelists for their insights on today, and I'd also like to thank the audience for joining us. We are publishing a report on this topic, which will be available on the RCR Wireless website following this webinar, which gives some more colour and information about what's going on in various parts of the world, in the UK, but also in the US and Spain, and also in Asia as well. So I can recommend that report to you. But thanks again to the panel, and thanks again to the audience. It's been a good discussion.